Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the latest webinar in our 2022 series. We're glad you could join us this evening. My name is Brian Harper, and I'm the Director of Communications here at DAN. As with all of our webinars, we will be doing a Q&A session at the end of this one, so post your questions in the chat on YouTube or Facebook. Feel free to post them as they come to you. We'll refer back to them in the Q&A session. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce Christine Tambury. Christine is the Risk Mitigation Coordinator at DAN. After graduating from Penn State University in 2020, she decided that a full-time job in the dive industry was her calling, and she became a summer intern at DAN. Later that year, she was hired into her current role, where she develops e-learning courses, assists first aid instructors worldwide, and designs risk assessment tools for dive operators and professionals. Christine is an avid cave and technical diver who spends every spare moment of her free time either cave diving or planning to go cave diving. Tonight, she will be presenting Environmental Stewardship for Divers. Thanks, Christine.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brian, and thank you to everyone joining us here tonight. As Brian mentioned, my name is Christine, and I am the Risk Mitigation Coordinator here at DAN. And tonight, I'm going to talk to you all about how you can be better environmental stewards. And hopefully over the next 25 minutes or so, I can give you some tips and tricks on how to make your diving more environmentally sustainable and how you can implement measures into your everyday life to benefit our planet. So let's get started. All right, the first thing that we want to do is define environmental stewardship. And this is the responsible use and protection of the natural environment through conservation and sustainable practices to enhance ecosystem resilience and human well-being. And essentially, this is divers stepping up to make a difference in the planet on every dive. It's getting in there and doing what needs to be done for the betterment of the ecosystems that we love to explore. A complementary term is ecological awareness. And this is a genuine understanding and concern for the importance of preserving and prudently using the physical environments, including the natural resources they provide and the life they support. And what this is saying is, thank you for being here tonight. Education is critical to increasing ecological awareness, and you being here is taking a step in the right direction, so we really appreciate it. And what we want to do first here is talk about what do we mean when we say environment? Well, I've defined 3 different systems for us. The first one being marine systems. These are your coral reefs, your intertidal rocky shores, your artificial reefs, and for my fellow cave divers out there, those caves that we dive in the ocean. Then we also have freshwater and brackish systems. Brackish meaning a combination of both fresh and salt water. These are your inland quarry and lakes. For our cave divers, our North Florida caves, as well as rivers and estuaries. All 3 of these environments are unique to one another, and they're all equally as important to each other. And it's really important that divers protect all of them similarly. And that raises the question, why must divers commit to protecting the environment? This seems like a pretty simple question, but I would like to start off by answering it in sort of a 30,000-foot view of why our waters are actually important. The first reason here is that our waters are a source of food and fresh water. So if you've ever had sushi or maybe a tuna steak, you have benefited from clean, healthy waters and the ecosystems that live there. Climate regulation is also another reason why our waters are important. So our oceans actually store solar radiation, and it distributes heat via currents around the world, which helps keep our climate regulated. Really, really important. Our climates also help in carbon dioxide reduction. So carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is increasing every single year, and our oceans are actually a sink of carbon dioxide, meaning it absorbs carbon dioxide. And this helps to keep that level at something that humans. Economic stability is our 4th reason that waters are important. And then at the core of everything is the health of humanity. And I'd like to go ahead and quote Dr. Sylvia Earle, explorer in residence at National Geographic, where she sums this up in one simple phrase: no water, no life, no blue, no green. Without our waters, we as a society cannot survive.
Christine, before you move on from this slide, could you talk a bit more about the economic?
Absolutely. So economic stability, I'd like to go ahead and break up into categories. The first one I'd like to talk about is, so think about diving. We go out into the world and we see local communities. If we as divers don't travel there because of, say, pollution in the water, the economy of those locations. So on a larger scale, think about sustainable fishing operations. If we don't have healthy waters, then those operations will not be able to earn an income, will affect the global economy. All right, now I want to talk a little bit about some common threats that our environment faces. The first one being climate change. So our atmosphere is warming every single year, which is in turn causing our ocean temperature to rise. This is resulting in things like coral bleaching, which ultimately can decrease productivity and life in environments. We also have ocean acidification. This is caused by an excess of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere by heavy industry. And this can result in a breakdown of limestone and coral reef systems, as well as the breakdown of shellfish. And this can result in a eruption. Pollution also threatens the environment, again, going back to that tourism issue. If waters are polluted, divers won't want to travel to destinations, thus the economy suffers. Land development is another threat, and this is construction that encroaches on the shorelines and cause erosion patterns to change, which ultimately impacts both land and water life. The extraction of resources is also important. The biggest one here is overfishing. So taking too many of one species out of the water will cause that species to potentially one day go away, which is not good for the food chain or humanity as a whole, obviously. Invasive species is yet another threat. I'll use the Great Lakes example here, the zebra mussels. I'm sure you guys have heard of this. This actually causes a decrease in production of native species because too many invasive area will override what is there in the first.
And you mentioned extraction of any other?
Yeah, for sure. So oil or mineral extraction in the seabed. So think of it like a chain reaction. If it causes harm to the seabed, that will eventually move its way up into the environments that divers see on every dive. And ultimately, it could even end up on your dinner plate. Think about maybe fish or ingesting microplastics, like that. It's all interlinked into one big circle. And our last threat here is humans. Humans are a major threat to the environment. This could be divers disturbing sediment, fisheries using explosives, or even swimmers using screen that contain toxins. And this is the scene that we see all too often in our dive industry, and even just beachgoers there on the left-hand side, seeing pollution or trash on the beach. Divers will see bleached coral, and really just a shame. And divers have the ability to impact some of these things. But if we're not able to take care of our environment, there's actually a couple of hazards that present themselves. The first one being a health hazard. So this is toxin. So this is directly related to the health of our waters. And again, things we ingest, or simply just destinations that we go to that have pollution in water. We also have physical hazards. So these are environmental disturbances. So this could be a diver kneeling on the bottom or maybe breaking off a coral head. And what this will ultimately cause is aesthetic impact. And think about that diver breaking that coral head off has done a lot of damage because that takes a long time to grow. And ultimately, if we are not able to combat these aesthetic impacts, what will be forced is our fourth hazard here, which is imposed preservation. And these are site closures. So the last thing divers want is to roll up to a site and realize that it's not available for diving because the environment is too degraded. And we have the ability to make an impact here. So we really want to be mindful when we are planning our dive excursions. And that's what we want to talk about now. How you as divers can make a difference on every single dive outing that you attend. And we want to start with some pre-trip planning. And the first thing we want to do here is talk about choosing an operator. And I'd like to talk about some visual cues that consumers can look for in their dive operators. These can be logos or infographics from training organizations, maybe large-scale conservation organizations. There's a variety of places that these logos can come from. and they all indicate to clients that an operator is committed to the environment. Maybe that operator has chosen to use green energy or is committed to implementing green energy in their operation in a certain time frame. Perhaps that operator only allows eco-friendly products to be used by their clients, or even better, provides those eco-friendly products for their clients to use during their time there. Maybe that operator chooses to only use mooring balls instead of anchoring to the substrate. Or perhaps they prohibit unlawful activities, especially those operators that are working in, say, marine sanctuaries, where spearfishing is not allowed. Operators with visual cues could very well implement strict measures to make sure that all laws are abided. And last but not least, these visual cues could indicate operators that take part in conservation projects, or even better, get their clients involved as well, because many hands make light work. Now I'd like to talk about packing and what to pack. And there is one common theme here, and that is reusable. Whether it be water bottles, utensils, straws, storage bags, tote bags, you name it, they probably make it. So if there's any one item that you typically throw away on a dive outing, try to find a reusable alternative to that item. And it's one thing to have divers do this, but it's another thing to get large groups involved. So we want you to promote responsible packing, especially if you're traveling with a large group from, say, a dive shop. Encourage others to also pack reusable and to pack as ecologically friendly as possible, again, to make as large of an impact as we can as a dive community. One thing that I'd really like to touch on specifically is exposure protection. And one thing you may not know is that most sunscreens actually contain toxins that are harmful to marine and aquatic life, as well as humans. And there's only really one way to ensure that your products are safe to use, and that is to read ingredient labels. And that little card there on the left-hand side is a list of common ingredients that are found in sunscreen that are actually toxic. And you can get this list from a variety of sources. One important thing to note is that there is little formal regulation on terms like green or natural when it comes to packaging products. So reading ingredient labels is the only way to truly ensure that your products are safe for you and our waters. Ultimately, covering up with a hat and a rash guard is the most eco-friendly way to protect yourself and the environment that we're going to enter as divers. So when in doubt, put the sunscreen down and pick up a hat and a rash guard. All right, so those were some pre-trip ideas. Now let's talk about what we as divers can do during our dives, and also some things that we do not want to do. But let's start out with what we should do in the water. The first one being keep your distance. So as divers, it's our job to enjoy the marine life, of course, but we want to do that from afar. So if you see animals swim by, enjoy them, but don't feel the need to chase them. More animals will come your way. We also want to use proper buoyancy in trim. So we don't want to be kneeling on the bottom, and we want to have some good spatial awareness to make sure we're not crashing into any part of the environment, whether that be a coral reef or even a bluegill nest in your local quarry. On a similar note, we also want to maintain a streamlined profile. So if you're not using something, make sure that it's properly secured with a bolt snap or maybe put it into a pocket. Anything dangling could make contact with the environment and thus cause some sort of negative impact. We encourage you to take photos and videos as long as it does not compromise your own in-water safety. Take photos of things that are beautiful and share those with your friends. Get them very excited about the underwater world and passionate about protecting it themselves. In the same sense, go ahead and take photos of things that maybe aren't so beautiful. Maybe take a picture of that trash around the dive site and show people so that they too can get passionate about becoming a better environmental steward. Again, we want to rally people here. We encourage you to report environmental violations, whether this be divers or operators doing these in violations. What we want you to do is make sure that the proper authorities are notified so that people are held accountable so we can mitigate impact in the future. Participate in conservation projects. These don't have to be lengthy. They could be a single day or maybe even a half day, but get involved in some way. Again, small acts can add up to create great change. So as many divers as we can get involved here, the better. We want to keep it clean, be a good human, make sure that all of your trash ends up in the proper receptacle. If recycling is available, make sure that your empty bottles and cans end up in that proper receptacle as well. And ultimately, if we take only memories and leave only bubbles, we will leave the environment the same or better than we were able to find it. All right, so those are some things that you should be doing on every dive. Now let's talk about a couple of things that you do not want to do as divers. The first one is kick coral. Again, this isn't just coral reefs. This could be your local bluegill nest or maybe a kelp field out off of California. There it is. We also don't want to disturb sediment. So if you've ever seen a large sandy area with small little animals poking their heads up, those could be garden eels and that sand could be their home. We don't want to kneel on the bottom there because that is their home and we want to make sure that it's preserved for generations to come. We also don't want to chase or touch underwater life of any kind. So if a turtle swims by, again, keep your distance. Have a look at it and let it go on its way. Ultimately, we are visitors in that turtle's home or any other marine life for that matter. This practice can cause animal stress, which is the last thing that we want to do as divers. We also don't want to feed the fish or sharks or any underwater life. This practice is unfortunately more and more common, and what can happen is these animals actually become dependent on divers for food. So if you jump in the water without food, they can actually become aggressive towards you, which is really the last thing that you'll want. We also don't want to throw trash into the water. Again, be a good human being. If you're on a boat, make sure that all of your trash is secure so that while you're traveling, none of that stuff accidentally blows overboard. We want to make sure that we're not spearfishing irresponsibly. So if you do choose to spearfish, make sure you do your research. Look up the local laws and regulations and definitely talk to your dive operators to make sure that you're able to do this activity as responsibly as possible. We as divers do not ever want to remove organisms, whether they be dead or alive, from the water. So if you come across, say, a starfish or maybe a sand dollar on the bottom, even if it's dead, go ahead and leave it there because that material will be recycled back into the environment to help preserve it for generations. And last but not least, unless environmental conditions dictate, try not to wear gloves. Wearing gloves encourages divers to touch things that they maybe shouldn't. So I challenge you to maybe leave the gloves in the bag, unless of course you need to wear them to perform.
Another question for you. You've listed some good things to avoid. One that comes up and becomes controversial. What about taking artifacts off?
Definitely a controversial topic, and I'm going to talk about here divers as individuals. And again, our topic of the night is environmental stewardship. So what we want to do if we want to be as environmentally sustainable as possible is to go ahead and leave those artifacts. If nothing else, we want other people to enjoy them just as much as we have. So just go ahead and leave them, allow them to build artificial reefs, let them be part of the environment. Again, that's in the context of conservation that country will surely live on.
Right.
All right. So now that we're out of the water, we need to talk a little bit about some post-dive action. What can we do to continue to be stewards long after we climb up that ladder? Feedback in social media. This is a really important and prevalent topic. Feedback is essential for businesses to grow and improve, and this feedback can be in the form of positive and negative. And I want to touch specifically on environmental considerations here because this is part of feedback that is often left out. So if you see something that an operator is doing really well, let them know so that they can continue to do that in the future. If, on the other hand, you see something that you don't agree with or that the business can improve on, go ahead and let them know that as well. Hopefully they're able to take that feedback and make it. We also want you to share your experiences with fellow divers, whether that be through social media, word of mouth, or even travel review sites. This can help other divers make educated choices for their own future travel.
And do you have any recommendations? Dive operators not respond well to feedback that you
Yeah, that's definitely a touchy situation. So if you provide feedback and you're really, you're here for it and you are really confident in your feedback that you're providing and they still don't take it, that's where you're going to take to that social media and those review sites. Let your fellow divers know, and hopefully that forces the operator to understand just how serious these issues are and make a change. So definitely just refer to those social media sites there. All right, when divers are not in the water, there's also a couple of things that they can do along with their non-diving counterparts to be environmental. The first thing here is we want to recycle and encourage others to do the same. Now, we are aware that there are some regions that recycling is not available, but if it is available, make sure you partake in that. Eating sustainable foods is really important as well. If you're thinking about maybe switching diets or you have a current diet that you really like, do your research and make sure that it's coming from a sustainable industry, especially fishing. We are all divers. One of the simplest things that we can do day to day is not litter. Again, be a good human. Make sure everything ends up where it needs to go. We can do this every single day, whether you are walking down the sidewalk and see a piece of trash, go ahead and pick it up, put that in the trash can. While we're traveling, we want to shop locally and responsibly. So maybe enter the small breakfast shops or the small trinket shops and support those local businesses and that local economy. If you see trinkets on the shelf, such as a conch shell for sale, go ahead and leave that behind. We don't want to promote any sort of poor harvesting, and we want to just be environmental stewards when it comes to spending our money wisely as well. And last but not least, we encourage you again to join a conservation organization or at minimum a one-day project, a one-week project. Just get involved. Again, small acts add up to create significant change. And you as a diver have an important responsibility. So, because again, this is what we are seeing in our industry, and this really needs to change. These dirty beaches, these bleached corals, if we all rally together and be the best environmental stewards that we can be, we can turn this into this, which is clean, healthy beaches, vibrant coral reefs, and we as an industry can ensure that these environments are protected for generations to come. So as we near the end here, I'd like to highlight a couple of additional resources. Oh, there we go. A couple of additional resources that we at DAN offer. This is going to be located at dan.diverelearning.com. There you can create a free, yes, free e-learning account. And on that site, we have 2 environmental stewardship courses. One is for divers, which is heavily based off of this presentation, and the other one is for dive operators and professionals. So this course will actually teach you anything from how to manage your compressor waste fluid to how to create an environmental sustainability plan. We also have other courses such as breathing gas quality, dive boat safety, emergency planning for both divers and dive operators and professionals, as well as our HIRA initiative, which is our hazard identification risk assessment. This is for businesses who want to make their operations as safe as possible, and you can check those all out on dan.diverelearning.com. So a couple of final thoughts to leave you with tonight. Again, education is critical. Thank you for being here and increasing your own levels of ecological awareness. This is part of this education. Environmental stewardship is not just an industry responsibility. It really starts with the diver. Small acts can add up to create great change. I'm going to keep saying it over and over again. So you as an individual have the ability to make an extremely large impact, and I encourage you to hopefully take a couple of things that we chatted about tonight away and implement them into your everyday diving routine. If you have any questions at all, we can be reached at riskmitigation@dan.org, and we are always happy to chat about how you and your business can be a better environmental steward. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Brian. Hopefully we've got some questions to kick around, and hopefully people are excited about it.
Yes, I think we do, and we are.
Awesome.
Thank you, Christine. Great presentation. And I really appreciate you mentioning the importance of small acts. It's easy to forget. A lot of us have done this and ocean advocates for years and years and decades, but it is always helpful to remember that there are people who are getting exposed to this mentality for the first time. that you being a role model as a diver, as a diver who is known in your community, that stuff matters. A reusable water bottle rather than plastic water bottles. That someone else sees you doing that, maybe that does make it.
Absolutely. And it can be really intimidating, right? This global issue of being an environmental steward. Again, just take it one step at a time. Divers have the ability to make a small impact that will eventually grow and create something.
Indeed. And I see a question here that's a good one. It appeared here in the Facebook feed a few moments ago, and so I've been pondering it, and it's not an easy one. This person is asking about climate denialism and or doomism. And how do you deal with those as a diver and as a dive community member? And I'll give you a second to think about your answer. But it's really two different questions. On the one hand, how do you deal with climate denialism is a different question than how you deal with doom. I think you're talking to two very different groups of people.
You absolutely are.
Yeah, and as for doomism, I mean, I've myself have dealt with, I have friends who are really active divers and who don't eat seafood. That's something that they feel like they can do to minimize impact upon the marine environment that we all enjoy. And so I've dabbled in that. But then on the other hand, I think, well, if commercial fisheries collapse, then what am I going to do as one person? And does that make any difference? Maybe I like shrimp. But like, what's the right answer there? I don't know. And as for denialism, what are your thoughts?
Wow, okay, so this is a great question first off, and I'd like to go ahead and touch on your doomism a little bit. I did have the opportunity to meet Dr. Sylvia Earle 2 years ago, right before the pandemic, and we actually had a little bit of a great discussion about this. It's all about what you can do for yourself. We don't want to look globally here. We don't want to look at the end game of the doom. We don't want to think about what can happen if we don't act now. What we can do right now is do something for ourselves and think about how we can make as big of an impact as individuals before we jump the gun and think about how we can do it as a group. So yeah, if you can eat sustainable foods right now, fantastic. But don't worry about whether those fisheries are going to collapse, because if they do, we're going to grow and adapt. It's a really complex question. It's honestly like a philosophical question as well. And I think it's just something for divers to think about ultimately and kind of dig deep at their own morals and think about how they would respond if they're ever faced with a situation where we have to make tough choices. In terms of denial, wow, I think this really comes down to educating yourself and helping to educate others as well. And also not giving in to any peer pressure. So if you're debating something with a group of friends and you are confident in your answer, again, stick to your guns. You know what you know, and you are educated. Again, you're here tonight, you're learning about this. Take what we have learned and discussed tonight and just keep true to it. I think that's the best way to kind of handle those situations.
I think another great thing to consider when people don't bad for aspects of environment is data. Now, on the one hand, like you said, arm yourself with the data. Study this stuff, research this stuff. If it matters to you, diving and the diving environment matters to you, the future of diving matters to you, then have this data. Share it with people. Another thing I would say, data isn't always compelling. These people save data as well. And so forming relationships with people can be crucial. And forming relationships with people who may see things differently than you. Maybe you both love diving and you start there, and if you can develop mutual respect based on a common interest, such as diving or beach or environment together, that is something that you can base future discussions on. Maybe you slowly win people over with your passion for the ocean and your commitment to protecting it and sharing good sources of information with them.
Absolutely, and I think I want to add one more thing too, just sitting here thinking about what you just said. I think it's really easy for divers to become really negative mindset when we think about some of the doom and gloom of what happens in the environment. We want to try as divers, and especially as a dive community as a whole, to maintain a positive attitude, because really once the positive attitude goes away, then progressive change is no longer made. So even with all the doom and gloom, try to keep it positive. That's true for life as well.
Good. Yes, another question about using products that are not toxic to fish or marine environment. Absolutely, that's, I think Christine touched on that with, looking out for dive operators who are responsible with the products they use, whether it's the cleaning products they use to clean boats and dive gear after dives, or mask defogger that they give to students and divers, and sunscreens, in general, a few slides back, you presented great information about sunscreen, and I think one thing that's pretty well documented at this point is the oxybenzones, and some of those have been demonstrated to be harmful to coral in really small concentrations. So I think a lot of people in the dive industry who care about coral health are gravitating toward those physical barrier sunscreens, the zinc oxide, titanium dioxide. Unfortunately, it seems like those aren't necessarily 100% great for the marine environment either, even though the chemicals may not be interacting with corals and marine life in harmful ways. The fact is that they can settle and blanket coral and prevent some degree of the photosynthesis that corals conduct. So, as you said, hats and long sleeve shirts are the best bet. So, more of that, and find the shade. Yep, is a good recommendation.
And we are seeing more and more operators around the world providing products for their consumers. We are also seeing places where they're completely banning the use of sunscreen at all, so that's where that hat and rash guard come into play, or places like Hawaii that have outlawed the use of products with things like oxybenzone, octinoxate, avobenzone. So we are seeing change. Maybe it's not perfect change right away, but it is positive change, really what we can hope for at this point.
Indeed. Well, thank you to all of you for being with us tonight, and a special thanks to Dan members without whom we could not do this sort of educational outreach. You can watch this presentation later on dan.org or Dan's YouTube channel. Thank you, Christine, for a great presentation. Thank you again for being here. Good night.